Good evening and welcome to Newservice'75. In this coming 90 minutes, we're going to take a look at some of the important events of 1974 with the hope of projecting some of the events we can reasonably expect in 1975. Could it be worse? We're tempted to answer yes, but that's much too simple. Indeed, it might not be correct. Consider some of the year we have just endured. The Middle East conflict produced an Arab oil embargo, which resulted in long lines and high prices at service stations. All that aggravated the twin evils of inflation and recession, and now fewer new cars are waiting in line at service stations, fewer new cars are being sold, and that has thrust us deeper into recession. Historians will review this year. They may tell us that we could have dealt more effectively with all those problems had we not been so involved in our domestic political crisis. But in truth, history will probably record 1974 more for its political turmoil than its economic crisis.
The Great Western Feeling. At Great Western Savings, you get the strength of assets over $4.5 billion. The highest interest you can find anywhere on insured savings, and so much more. You get the feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western Feeling.
All Vaughn's beef carries the exclusive Table King name. It's USDA inspected for wholesomeness and hand-selected for quality by Vaughn's meat specialists. Then Table King beef is trimmed for leanness and priced to save you money. To be sure of tender and flavorful beef, shop at Vaughn's for Table King quality at Vaughn's value prices. Here's an example.
Table King chuck steak, blade cut, just 59 cents a pound.
When I get a headache, I rely on Excedrin. Sure, I use regular aspirin, but I think Excedrin is better for headache because it's worked better for me. And it worked better in a research study at a major hospital among hundreds of people with pain other than headache. In fact, the doctors reported Excedrin was significantly more effective than a regular aspirin tablet in this research. Trust your headache to Excedrin, the extra strength pain reliever. See if it doesn't work better for you.
The collective crimes we now lump together as Watergate will be dealt with in detail for years to come. Some conclusions still haven't been reached. Here, we're concerned with some of the effects of Watergate, especially as it dealt with California politics. The fall of Richard Nixon was felt everywhere. As late as last week, Republicans trying to pick up the pieces were saying publicly, "We were betrayed by Richard Nixon." President Gerald Ford was greeted with hope. Some of that remains, but at this point in time, a phrase we were to hear often this year, the qualities of niceness, warmth, and openness, qualities so lacking in Richard Nixon, have yet to be matched with the quality of leadership, a quality we must have to go forward. The capacity for leadership was also a question in the California race for governor, but many things were questioned there: party ties, even parentage.
If your name were, say, Edmund G. Green, Jr., would you be here today?
Obviously, that has an impact in this election and my whole life. But also the fact that Ronald Reagan ran in a landslide had something to do with his being elected, and the fact that Reineke was indicted when he was ahead in the polls had something to do with his election. So let's not try to sift out why he's elected or why I'm elected. Let's talk about the issues.
The campaign was more a personality contest than a battle over the issues. Houston Flournoy, the state controller and Claremont professor, charged his opponent was inexperienced and simply trading on the name of his famous father, the former governor. Jerry Brown, the young Secretary of State, claimed a Flournoy administration would be Reaganism recycled and promised to bring a new spirit to Sacramento.
The campaign failed to generate much excitement among the voters. But when people did turn out, they usually came to hear Jerry Brown.
I was born in this city. I lived here most of my life, and I've never seen the air pollution 2 weeks ago as bad as it was. And I think we can make it better.
It's an election that will not be remembered for very many old-fashioned political rallies, but the Democrats still demonstrated their ability to draw a crowd. On Election Day, the voters stayed home in droves. The turnout was the lowest in nearly 30 years.
Jerry Brown led the polls by 14 points from the start, and Houston Flournoy faced being a Republican in a bad year for Republicans. Watergate revelations, the resignation of former President Nixon, and then the Nixon pardon forced the campaign off the front pages and made Flournoy fundraising all but impossible. Playing to small audiences and little media coverage, he began promoting himself not as a Republican, but an independent.
When President Ford stumped the country on behalf of Republican candidates, that didn't help Houston Flournoy either. Mr. Ford searched for the economic issue and called on Americans to vote their grocery checkout slips. Jerry Brown picked up that challenge and turned it around.
Vote your grocery bill. When you go there, between now and Tuesday, take a look at the cost of milk, of beef, of ordinary groceries, of canned goods, of dry goods. Take a look at the cost of gasoline, your mortgage, and then ask yourself, is it time for a change? It sure is time for a change.
Flournoy was frustrated by the candidates' agreement that there would be just 6 face-to-face debates. Only one was seen statewide, but he clung to a basic faith that if the voters had a chance to see enough of the two, they would choose him, and he refused to alter his low-key campaign style. Then in the final week, whether it was due to personalities or stands on the issues or a closing of GOP ranks, it began to look like a horse race.
Even as Jerry Brown flew up and down the state on the day before the election, he seemed to be running out of time. All through the campaign, the polls said Brown was comfortably ahead, but by the last day, Brown himself had a gut feeling it would be close. Just how close became clear on election night, when Brown waited for hours before claiming the victory. When he did, it was a family affair. His father and mother joined him on the platform.
I want to be a governor, not of the few, but of the many, of the Democrats, the Republicans, the independents, everybody in this state, so people will once again look to this state to see how it can be done.
For Houston Flournoy, time ran out too soon.
I would hope that the people that supported me will stay active, because I think we had great people, and we'll keep our options open.
When all the votes were counted, Brown was the winner by less than 3 percentage points. He spoke of the challenge he now faced, fully aware of that thin margin of victory.
The question is not the margin, but it's what you do once you're elected. The quality of your administration, its responsiveness to the aspirations of the people of the state. That's the critical question. What happens on Election Day is a beginning, not an end.
With me now, reporters Heidi Schulman and Saul Halpert, who were the principal reporters in covering this campaign. Saul, you know Jerry Brown. What can we expect from Governor Jerry Brown?
Well, judging by the careful and methodical way that he's gone about putting together his first budget and the way he's been screening applicants for state jobs, I think we can expect a highly professional administration. But what it does depends on the economy. If the downturn continues, if we slide into a serious recession, then there's not really that much that the governor or the state can do. It's a national problem. And Governor Brown will not be responsible any more than Mr. Flournoy would have been. But he's going to take the blame anyway. So I think the Brown administration is taking on a very tough job.
Heidi, I suppose the problem with the Republican Party is a national problem, but what about the future of the Republican Party in California?
Here in the state in 1975, I think they'll have two main problems to face. One is where philosophically their leadership is going to come from. They lost in 1974 with a moderate like Houston Flournoy and a conservative like John Harmer running for lieutenant governor. The other question is really rebuilding the registration that they've lost. It's down. It's at an all-time low for the last modern period, and they'll be looking to rebuild the confidence that they lost this year in the party in order to win votes next time.
Thank you, Heidi. Only one Republican survived the Democratic landslide in statewide office. District Attorney Evel Younger was reelected. A couple of other races of interest saw the first black elected lieutenant governor. Irvin Dimely easily defeated Lieutenant Governor John Harmer, even though Harmer had the advantage of incumbency, a result of Governor Reagan naming Harmer to replace Ed Reineke, who had been convicted of perjury. And March Fong, born in the back of a Chinese laundry, was elected to move into the Secretary of State's office. A significant victory for a woman, especially an Asian woman. Locally, one of the real issues was rapid transit. Mayor Tom Bradley had put his rather sizable political reputation on the line in backing rapid transit. Bradley had warned this might be the voters' last chance. It failed. Channel 4 reporter Warren Wilson has covered much of Mayor Bradley's activity in the past year. Is Mayor Bradley discouraged, Warren?
Not very much, somewhat. Bradley says he will continue to fight for rapid transit, but in small increments instead of rails stretching citywide. However, he has abandoned a timetable. But with $1 billion in federal mass transit funds, Bradley says we could get started on selecting a route by the end of this year. Mayor Bradley says he has achieved much of what he set out to do in his first year in office. Recently, we walked and talked about 74 and priorities for 75.
He was influential as self-appointed mediator and helped settle two major strikes, RTD and Department of Water and Power. Bradley proposed and the City Council agreed to slash LA's budget by $10.5 million. That meant no new taxes. He was instrumental in consolidating city and county beaches at a savings of $1 million annually. But most importantly, the political climate has changed in City Hall. Despite some vetoes, Bradley is still on good terms with the council, something that's vital for his goals in 1975.
Foremost among my concerns in 1975 is the question of jobs. How do we bring more jobs into the city? I think the public service program, which I supported and which the Congress has passed and the President has signed, will help us greatly. We'll get $28 million out of that program. We'll be able to hire many more people. We're going to have to work on the question of crime, juvenile violence in particular. I have a juvenile justice planning task force, a staff now that is able to help us identify the programs that we need to deal with that problem. In the field of housing and community development, the council has just approved the concept that we suggested to them of how we spend $39 million that we got under what is called a block grant approach from the federal government to improve the quality of housing and the circumstances of people in their communities.
Where would that money go specifically? Which areas of the city is going to get most of it?
Every area of the city is going to get some portion of those funds. Two major programs, the Community Redevelopment Agency, our Urban Renewal Program, is an ongoing program. It will get a substantial amount, about $12 million. The Model Cities Program, which has been an ongoing program for several years, will get approximately $10 million. The rest of it is going to be divided in a very creative way in what we call the Housing Assistance Plan, where we'll either be moving in good and decent housing, or we'll be rehabilitating some housing we're getting from the federal government, or we'll be making loans through the savings loans institutions where the city will help subsidize the interest rate so that individuals can improve, can rehabilitate their own housing.
It is significant that Bradley has charted a course of helping the poor and jobless in 1975. With the election of Edmund Brown Jr., a new, more liberal state legislature, and Watergate cleaning up Washington, Mayor Bradley feels that more money will be available to help the poor in the year ahead. Jess?
Thank you, Warren. The City Council with which Mayor Bradley must deal has one vacant seat now that Ed Edelman has been elected to the Board of Supervisors. Who's going to fill it? The maneuvering's already begun. The City Council has 3 blacks and 1 woman, but there is no Chicano. In spite of the Mexican-American or Chicano being the largest minority, it's been years since they've been represented on the City Council. Some of that frustration was reflected in 1974 by an unsuccessful effort to incorporate East Los Angeles as an independent city. In East Los Angeles, we spoke with Yolanda Nava and David Ochoa, the co-hosts of Impacto, a KNBC public affairs program dealing with the Chicano community.
One of the most important things that we learned in 1974 was that we aren't organized yet politically. The failure of the incorporation of East LA is a critical setback spiritually and emotionally to the Chicano community, and we have a long way to go. If the nation as a whole, Jess, is suffering because of the low state of the economy, the Chicano community, which is already at the bottom of the poll in terms of income and unemployment, underutilization, the Chicano community, if I were to say the most critical issue, it's got to be unemployment, it's got to be the recession, it's got to be the economy.
And of course the spin-off from that is the fact that less money will go into educational programs such as bilingual education, which is one of the greatest needs that we have in the community. Less people are going to be hired, there's going to be less special programs that would affect the community in a positive way, be there employment training or education programs.
Is there any bright spots?
I definitely do. I think for the first time we had 2 governors that were elected, one in Arizona, Raul Castro, and Jerry Apodaca, New Mexico. We have 2 state senators going into the California legislature for the first time. We have 4 assemblymen returning to the legislature, and I think we have the opportunity to elect a city council, first Chicano city council person in Los Angeles in the very near future. So I see politically that things are definitely picking up.
Do you agree? You're that encouraged?
No, I'm not, Jess. I'm very unencouraged. I'm very pessimistic about the future of 1975 for Chicanos. I see a depression ahead of us. I see higher unemployment. I see higher voter discontent, voter apathy in the Chicano community. I see a Democratic Party which is not responsive to the needs of the Chicano community. In short, I think the whole nation is going to have a bad year in 1975, and if that's true, it's going to be twice as bad, I think, for Spanish-turning Americans of Southern California.
David Ochoa's pessimism is easy to understand looking back on the year just ended. Bob Abernathy has a viewpoint. Bob?
One of the hallmarks of 1974, as of many recent years, was the further collapse of authority. Once you could look around at towering political leaders like Winston Churchill, with equally respected counterparts in business, education, and the church. Franklin Roosevelt was another hero to millions of people. But you search almost in vain for heroes now, because skepticism in general and Vietnam and Watergate in particular have all but destroyed the confidence we once had in the powerful. So it's symbolic and significant that the central character of 1974's greatest drama was a failed leader, once the imperial president, now an outcast invalid.
The whole world is out of
Go out listening to anything on anyone's mind, as I did several times last year, and you hear again and again a sense of having been forgotten, even abandoned by those in charge.
I feel that our legislators aren't responsive to the public. I feel we've lost our sense of national purpose, that we seem to be drifting, and we don't have any clear-cut goals.
Some people react to this drift by withdrawing into apathy or nostalgia. Most just keep on doing their daily chores. Some say if they can't depend on leaders anymore, they'll do the job themselves, and so they join citizens' action movements to defend the environment and reform the election laws. But it's hard to see how even the most persevering volunteers can by themselves meet the demands of 1975. Coping with international shortages of food and fuel, restoring health to our sick economy, and maybe above all, rediscovering and redefining a strong common purpose. Nobody wants a strong man, which some see as a danger, but most of us, I think, would welcome this new year leaders once again who could deserve our trust and inspire our best. Jess?
Thanks, Bob. We'll continue with News Service 75 after this commercial break.
That great Western feeling. At Great Western Savings, you get the strength of assets over $4.5 billion. The highest interest you can find anywhere on insured savings, and so much more. get the feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western feeling.
It's my husband, the fisherman. He loves to catch fish, but he hates to eat fish. In other words, the fish are biting, but he isn't.
Because fish tastes fishy.
Not ate salt fish, Lloyd.
Helen, fish go to schools to learn how to taste fishy.
Well, ate salt fish must have cut class. Try it.
Doesn't taste fishy. Delicious.
Still hate it, Lloyd.
Used to hate it till I ate it.
He's hooked.
Ate salt doesn't taste fishy.
Thanks to TV, a lot of people know my face, but not many know my name. So because I travel, I got an American Express card. Right away, it says two things about me. One, I am responsible, and two, I earn a good income. And it says it at restaurants, hotels, stores, and airlines all over the world. The American Express card. Maybe Burt Reynolds doesn't need one, but you and I do. To apply for the American Express card, call 800-528-8000.
Everywhere, prices for goods and services soared. There was increasing pressure for higher wages. For many, pressure meant taking up the picket sign. There were no less than 24 strikes in Los Angeles County in '74, everything from garbage to supermarket shutdowns. But '75 promises to be a quieter labor year because of fewer expired contracts. And pressure meant boycotting to lower food prices, but nothing really worked. And where did we most feel it? Right here at the supermarket, where confused and angry shoppers were faced with rising prices on almost every item every week, where a bottle of vegetable oil went up 62%, and where a loaf of bread advanced 23% all in 1 year. In 12 months, food prices went up 13% here, and next year what happens will depend mostly on the weather. We still have not recovered from '74's weather disasters. Drought and frost killed most of what was expected to be a record crop, and for the third straight year there will not be enough grain to meet demand. Tight crops will almost surely affect consumer prices on beef and poultry. Most food items will advance about half as much as '74, and with purchasing power down to 62 cents on the dollar, we'll be buying less. Yet, despite shrinking funds, it seemed that shoppers, spurred on by pre-Christmas sales, were out in full force this year. Ahead, though, forecasters predict a difficult year for the retailers and manufacturers. Wages will go up about 9%, but they still won't beat rising prices until the last half of '75. Until then, our buying habits will be cautious. But affecting spending and income even more than caution is going to be the continuing problem of jobs. On the one hand, a record number of jobs are going to be created in California in '75, but on the other hand, pessimists are still predicting double-digit unemployment. Unemployment lines are expected to swell even beyond present numbers to perhaps 750,000 people statewide. And the auto industry will be slow in coming out of its depression. As the year progresses, sales in California should show a modest 5 to 6% increase. That should also help employment. Forecasters say the primary force in improving the depressed construction industry will be an easing of monetary policy and an easing of mortgage interest rates. Both of these effects we should begin to feel in early '75. With most of the effect aiding single-family homes, but along with easier interest rates will be the continuing bite of inflation. The median price for a single-family home is expected to go from $36,000 to $41,000 in '75. The events of the past year shattered all our beliefs in the strength in our economic system. Each one of us felt the bite, the confusion, and the fear, and it is not over yet. Many of our economic problems began with the Arab oil embargo and the resulting increases in oil prices. For a look at how that situation shapes up for 75, here is John Marshall.
In 1974, Los Angeles relied on the Arabs for nearly half the fuel oil used to generate electricity. So when the supply was cut off, there was quite a panic at City Hall.
Thank the councilman for...
After days of fiery debate, the city council ordered most people to cut back their power up to 20%. Severe penalties for violators were threatened. The Water and Power Department spent $1.3 million on extra paperwork and people to explain the cutback program to confused customers. Power consumption dropped more than 18%. After a month and a half, the DWP had a problem. The power demand had gone down so far, the department's oil storage tanks were filled to capacity at the height of the energy crisis. At one point, an oil-powered generating plant was shut down because it wasn't needed. Finally, in May, the Water and Power Commissioners decided there was enough oil to call off the emergency. The threat of penalties was lifted.
Today, 1 year after the crisis, the city's storage tanks are brimming with fuel oil. And unlike those dark days of 1974, Christmas lights have returned to the city's streets.
Even though the Water and Power Department didn't discourage lights this Christmas, the emphasis on energy conservation will continue in the year to come. Consumption even now is running about 8% less than normal usage. DWP officials say they will seek a boost in electric rates within a few months. That alone might be ample reason for most of us to continue to conserve in 1975.
Conservation, of course, won't be confined to our homes. The high price of using energy will also be felt in the other place Southern Californians spend much of their time, in their cars. Nobody knows whether the gasoline situation in 1975 will be as bad as it was in early 74, but it could be.
This is the way it was before. We suddenly found ourselves with a gasoline supply that met about 80% of the demand. This put drivers into a panic. Stories of people waiting in line 3 hours to buy 50 cents worth of gasoline were not uncommon. After about a month of panic buying, Governor Reagan imposed the odd-even gasoline sales plan. It wasn't perfect, but it did seem to cut down the lines. A few weeks later, the embargo was off, the oil was flowing again, and the odd-even plan was scrapped.
Whether we see the odd-even plan or some other form of gas rationing in 1975 depends on what President Ford does in the next few weeks. What he does will also affect how we heat and light our homes and might even affect our jobs. The President is going to ask Congress to reduce our reliance on foreign oil. The precarious situation in the Middle East and skyrocketing oil prices have made this an economic necessity. Mr. Ford's voluntary approach to energy conservation simply hasn't worked, so stiff mandatory measures now are almost certain. There are three options most frequently mentioned by White House advisors: a heavy new tax on gasoline, a quota on oil imports, or a new tax on all crude oil, not just gasoline. Whatever Mr. Ford proposes, it's bound to hurt most of us, some more than others, but the administration seems convinced that stringent measures must be taken to avoid an energy crisis that might be even worse than the one in 1974. Yes?
Thanks, John. No question, it affects us all. The great American amalgam, consumers. That's a word and a world with which David Horowitz has dealt in Action 4. David?
Jess, in 1974, we didn't know who was protecting us in the marketplace because government was so riddled with scandal and corruption, while at the same time products that are American institutions were under attack. Research indicated that peanut butter could, under some circumstances, cause cancer-producing cells in animals. We learned most ice cream is loaded with all sorts of officially sanctioned chemicals. Some forms of these chemicals are also used in the manufacture of antifreeze and plastics. The gas Freon, which is used as a propellant in aerosol cans, is starting to pollute the ozone layer above the Earth. We learned cigarette smoke can almost be as dangerous as cigarette smoking itself. And finally, tests show that our drinking water is even suspect. We were frightened by all of this, but few alternatives were offered by either the government or industry. But a number of laws and regulations went into effect in 1974 that give us all more protection. Now most food products will have to have nutritional labeling to let us know what the ingredients are. In California, prices of the 100 most commonly used drugs must be posted in pharmacies, and druggists have to give us the price of any prescription we want over the telephone. Moving companies in California are now limited to what they can charge over estimate. Income tax preparers must be registered with the state, and those who sell gold must be licensed. And if gasoline supplies run short again, service station and car wash operators will have to sell us the gas without any conditions. In 1975, the Brown administration promises to give the consumer more of a voice in the government agencies that regulate him most. The net effect will probably mean more forceful and stringent consumer legislation. And this year, very strong consumer groups plan to fight the banks, the insurance companies, and other special interest groups that have long been opposing us in the marketplace with lobbyists that we haven't been able to fight. And if in 1975 you can't get satisfaction elsewhere, then try me and Action 4 with your problem. Jess?
Thanks, David. As we stated at the outset of this program, most of these issues are interrelated. Consumer products, costs, jobs, welfare, the administration of justice. An unlikely grouping, perhaps, but each is involved in this next issue, illegal aliens.
The Immigration and Naturalization Service estimates there are some 6 million illegal aliens in the U.S. Most of them are from Mexico, Central and South America. They reportedly hold more than 1 million jobs in factories, farm fields, restaurants, and American households. Some federal officials are blaming them for the country's economic woes, saying the illegals are taking jobs away from Americans. But these aliens don't look at themselves as villains. They feel they're getting the lowest paying jobs simply because Americans don't want them. Thousands of them worked in California's farm fields last year. Farm labor leader Cesar Chavez charged the Immigration Service allowed illegals to cross the border to help growers. Chavez says it was the biggest factor in crippling his table grape and lettuce strikes. The Farm Workers Union even set up patrols along parts of the border in an effort to discourage Mexicans from working in the fields. While these aliens continue to work here, drawing as little attention to themselves as possible, many are trying to obtain the necessary documents that will end the threat of arrest and deportation. But it takes time, often months, to cut through the red tape. Antonio is a 26-year-old school teacher from Guatemala. He has been here illegally for nearly 5 years. He's married to a Cuban refugee. All he needs now are his papers.
In a way, I feel frustrated because I can do things that I like to do, like, for example, going back to school. And if I were laid off, I can't collect unemployment.
Why did you decide to try again to get your papers?
Well, now that I'm married, I have a better chance. I don't think this time they'll deny my visa.
Do you think that you're a threat to the economy of the United States?
Well, I don't think so, because I don't believe I'm taking anybody's place in this society. I mean, I work and I pay my taxes. So I've been doing this for 5 years, and I believe that after this time I do have some rights to stay.
The effort to catch more illegals has been intensified by the Immigration Service. More agents have been deployed along the border. Nearly 800,000 aliens were caught last year. It will be closer to 1 million this year. The search for illegals is being carried out against a backdrop of scandal involving the INS and charges that a lengthy investigation of high-ranking border officials is being covered up.
There has been a great deal of vocal effort made to attempt to make the Immigration Service a whipping boy in this. But I merely want to point out that the grand jury that was investigating Immigration Service has been attempting to find evidence against some of the top officials of the Immigration Service for almost 2 years. And since there have been no indictments, I can only presume that they've been unable to come in with any evidence of criminality.
That was Joseph Surek, the District Director of the Immigration Service here in Los Angeles. The Immigration Service says the only way the problem of the illegal alien is going to be solved is through congressional action. A bill to crack down on employers who hire illegals died in the Senate last year, but will be reintroduced when Congress reconvenes. That measure by Congressman Peter Rodino has been widely criticized by employers who feel it's the government's job, not theirs, to find out if a worker has legal resident status. Jess?
Thanks, Joe. It is true that a faltering economy hurts those who can stand it the least, the alien, the poor, and especially the black poor.
Right, Jess.
John Mack hosts the KNBC Public Affairs program What's Going On. He is also Executive Director of the Urban League. He said the most important factors for the black community in 1975 are education and employment, and the two issues are tied together. On the one hand, he expressed fears our involvement with the recession and inflation problems would eliminate necessary attention to issues such as civil rights, integration, quality education. But he concedes the long lines of blacks at unemployment offices make the economy a very special concern of that minority community as well.
Frankly, 75 really isn't very bright unless we have a tremendous turnaround in the economy, to a much greater degree than we've seen thus far. And there's got to be a philosophy turnaround as well on the part of our national government in particular, getting away from this notion that you solve the problem by extending and expanding the problem of unemployment, which is another very serious and gross misrepresentation of the fact. Because for that person who's out of the job, it's no consolation to say, well, you know, why don't you just keep the faith and hold tight, you know, maybe in the sweet by and by you'll get a job somewhere down the line. That's of no use to that individual's family and their attempt to survive.
John Mack's concern is remarkably reminiscent of what columnist Walter Lippmann, one of the great men we lost in 1974, once wrote. Lippmann wrote, "The fear of losing one's job, the necessity of being somebody in a crowded and clamorous world, the terror that old age will not be secured, that your children will lack opportunity. There are 1,000 terrors which arise out of the unorganized and unstable economic system under which we live." Lippmann wrote that in 1914. But he went on to say, "A mistake matters far less than most of us imagine. The world is not brittle, but elastic." We'll continue in a moment.
The Great Western feeling. At Great Western Savings, you get the strength of assets over $4.5 billion and so much more. You get the feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western feeling.
I'm a stockbroker, so you can imagine the pressures and the headaches that I get. But I don't have them for long because I take Anacin. It's great. It's really different.
Mr. Roper, maybe the difference is Anacin's extra pain reliever. While all three leading pain relievers reach an effective level in your bloodstream in minutes, in the final analysis, only one of them hits and holds the highest level, Anacin. This difference is the extra pain reliever Anacin provides.
Anacin does not upset my stomach.
Next headache, take Anacin for a higher level of pain reliever.
Last year, Toyota had the lowest sticker-priced car sold in America. It came with white walls, reclining bucket seats, 4-speed, all standard. That was last year. This year, Toyota still has the lowest sticker-priced car sold in America, the all-new 1975 Corolla 1600 two-door sedan. And it comes with all that stuff, plus power front disc brakes, a bigger engine, and even more room. See how much car your money can buy from Toyota.
If you've wanted to get rid of that extra padding you've been carrying around since the holidays, you're probably going to want a low-calorie diet for yourself and your family. As part of that diet, you're probably going to want a food that's high in energy but low in fat. A food like Newservice low-fat cottage cheese. Almost pure energy and bright fresh flavor. Newservice low-fat cottage cheese. A good way to help you get back to normal.
we, the people, us folks, 1974 was a year when nothing seemed to work right. From the presidency all the way down to our seatbelt buzzers. It was the year of the big bust. Remember how we waited for Evel Knievel's big jump across the Snake River Canyon? A bust. And how excited we got about the mighty comet Kohoutek. It was going to be the brightest light to streak across the sky in hundreds of years. A bust. And speaking of streaking, remember Robert Opel? He's the fellow who streaked the Oscar Awards. We thought streaking was going to give us a few laughs in '74, and boy, we could have used them. But streaking was just a quick flash in the pan. Sonny and Cher busted up in '74, the show and the marriage. Then the Sonny Show was born, a double bust. George Putnam's long television career went bust this year. Sam Yorty's radio show, gone. Jack Parr's late-night comeback, down the tubes. The heralded return of Peyton Place, a big bust. And speaking of busts, Fannie Fox, Wilbur Mill's stripper friend, she was busted in a Florida nightclub for dancing bottomless. Bobby Riggs was sort of a bust this year. He couldn't hustle anything. Then there was Fred the Hammer Williamson. He was going to bring new life to ABC's Monday Night Football, make them forget Don Meredith. 2 weeks in, they forgot Fred the Hammer Williamson. The Angels were a bust this year. What else is new? And the World Football League is flat busted. They can't even make their payroll. Mark Spitz, the swim whiz, made his big showbiz debut this year. In Australia, Frank Sinatra and his people went around busting everybody in the nose. David Carradine got busted for busting up a house. Liz and Dick busted up for good. They're still splitting up the stuff. Marvin Mandel and his wife busted up. He's the governor of Maryland, but his wife refused to budge out of the governor's mansion, so even the bust-up was a bust. The singing telegram died this year. Now they'll only talk you a happy birthday. Earl Butts talked a lot this year, and every time he opened his mouth, he made another country mad, including ours. Here at NBC, we had our own bust, besides some of the shows. We tried to add on a couple of floors to our building. When they lit the blow torches, we caught on fire. And when it rained, we flooded. Unemployment's up, the market's a bust, prices are out of sight. That's 1974, the year of the bust. This lady agrees, but it's not all bad. Know what? She's a winner. She won a contest for making the awfulest face in 1974. But the year of the bust, 74, that old dog is behind us now, so let's try to get it all together in 1975. Happy New Year. We deserve it.
Thank you, Kelly.
My pleasure.
A man who's trying to put it together in 1975 is Ronald Reagan. He leaves the governor's mansion in Sacramento to return to his home in the Pacific Palisades. No one believes it's a permanent move. As he reflected on his 8 years as governor, it's clear he doesn't think this is the end.
Governor, you were considered our first citizen politician. If you had to do it over again, would you still do it?
Oh, yes.
Would you do it the same way?
Oh, there might be some changes along the line. I think anyone, you certainly learn from experience, or you're standing still. But yes, when I did it, you know, I was really a reluctant dragon.
You're obviously very proud of what's been accomplished in your 2 terms, and yet you recognize that there are things that did not get finished. Have you had any moments of second thoughts about choosing not to seek a 3rd term?
No, but I could have been very tempted. But you see, I made it so strong in the beginning of these 8 years that I felt that there should be a 2-term limitation on governors of California. I still believe that. And I'm pretty good proof of it, because I would have been greatly tempted to try again if I hadn't taken such a strong position.
You obviously looked ahead at your future. Let me ask you quite candidly, what do you think the future of Ronald Reagan is?
Well, we'll find out how well I'm received in the speaking circuit and on the radio and the things that I'm going to do of that kind, and because that's as far as I've gone in my planning, is to do that, and as I say, try to make the people aware of some of the things that I've learned in these 8 years in government. I have arranged my affairs to do radio, to do some writing, and to do public speaking on a nationwide basis on these things we've been talking about here, because I believe the people believe a lot of things politically and economically that aren't true. And if I can be a help in shedding a little light on it, I'm going to try.
A presidential campaign? Governor Reagan says he hasn't even allowed himself to think about that. But if that's true, he's about the only Republican who hasn't thought about a Reagan candidacy. The economy, unemployment, and the energy crisis have been pretty tough issues for the ecologists to combat. In this critical time, we were told we would have to delay enforcing tough environmental standards. In our overriding concern for our economic well-being, we have given in. Smog control devices on used cars is an issue in limbo right now. Even impact-resistant bumpers on new cars are being sacrificed. We're warned they add too much to the cost of the car and require too much energy in production. Our shortage of oil is turning us to burning more coal, but the real push is for offshore drilling. Here's Steve Mallory.
The environmentalists in their war against offshore oil operations are slowly running out of strategical moves and friends. Faced with continued fuel shortages, government officials and other oil companies and some of the public are rallying around the empty gas can and calling for offshore development.
For those reasons, massive operations off the Southern California coast are expected to move closer to reality this year. The oil companies are already planning to bid in June for the lease of 1.6 million offshore acres located in federal waters. The Western Oil and Gas Association says there's an estimated 14 billion barrels of oil out there. But there are already efforts underway to delay that lease. Though nearly 5 years have passed since a platform was anchored off the coast, the steel for the world's tallest platform is now being forged. The Exxon Oil Company plans to place that structure in the Santa Barbara Channel in federal waters by 1977. Oil drilling and development within the 3-mile limit has been stopped since the channel blowout in 1969. But within the past 2 months, the Lame Duck State Lands Commission has approved the drilling of nearly 60 wells from 5 existing channel platforms. During the December meeting, the Santa Barbara City Attorney argued against that permit.
The adverse environmental impacts identified in this EIR require that the State Lands Commission deny this application until such time that the industry is able to show that it is willing to take the necessary steps to preserve the environment, not to sacrifice it.
The city of Santa Barbara and the newly elected state controller, Ken Corey, have taken legal action to block some of the drilling that has been approved. Now that Corey is a member of the commission, he expects that the approval decision will be reversed. Most of those who oppose offshore development contend the oil companies don't have the technological ability to prevent a blowout, and that they don't have adequate containment and cleanup capabilities. The general manager of WOGA, the Western Oil and Gas Association, disagrees.
We're living in an entirely new world, and we're going to be very, very positive of ourselves that we can do the best possible job to protect the environment. We're constantly being criticized on all hands that we're not doing anything about the environment, that we don't care about the environment. We really do for our own benefit. I think that we know a lot more about how to drill for oil than most of the people that are commenting that they don't think we can do it.
In an effort to prove that, some oil companies are trying to set up a permanent blowout prevention school in Ventura County. Here, crews would learn what to do should a drilling problem occur.
Though most people don't realize it, some limited drilling has been underway in the Santa Barbara Channel for the past 3 years. As the legal battles continue this year, oil company officials will probably allude to that as they try to sell offshore operations, pointing out that those past operations have been conducted without incident. Jess?
Thank you, Steve. Environment at its simplest is a concern for the quality of life. No issue is really more people-oriented, but sometimes we lose sight of that. In the year just ended, we saw broad sections of Los Angeles leveled in the name of redevelopment.
In the Little Tokyo section, old buildings were destroyed to make way for high-rise financial structures. But here was a dilemma. The bulldozers were destroying a culture, a way of life. The stores, the old hotels and rooming houses were eyesores, and many were unsafe. But they provided goods and services and a place to live for people who can't find it elsewhere. When you speak only Japanese, you live where the merchants and the newspapers speak your language, where the markets cater to your needs. George Takei of KNBC's Expressions East-West.
The people who live here have to live here because of linguistic or cultural requirements. The people who do business here are tied to it for traditional, sentimental reasons, as well as the fact that their customers are here.
Are most of them too old then to be absorbed into the majority community too?
I would say the residents most definitely. The businessmen, I think, perhaps could move their businesses, but it's at enormous cost. And I think, really for the city of Los Angeles too, it's losing that that wonderful richness of this ethnic community here, the diversity that it contributes to the larger Los Angeles community.
A few blocks away, we spoke with Beulah Quo, also of Expressions East-West. We were in Chinatown, a changing Chinatown.
This area, which was once a tourist and a commercial section in the last decade, has become a total community, mainly because of the increase of immigrants from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, coming to Los Angeles. And yearly there's influx of from 3,000 to 5,000 immigrants who mainly come to settle around this community.
This was never expected to be a residential community, though.
Never, no.
But it clearly is now. At a time when most enrollment has leveled off, here schools are overflowing with children, many of them recent immigrants. And as in Little Tokyo, there are those who are culturally bound to this place, and they must be accommodated. The Asian communities have much in common.
We feel that many of the problems that we've encountered haven't in this country haven't been as a result of the fact that we're Japanese or Chinese, but because we look alike. You know, we're all Asians. And so many of the social problems and the discrimination problems have to be dealt on that basis. There's also the political realities here. We're a very small minority when we compare ourselves with other ethnic minorities. And in order to get that kind of political muscle, we need the realities force us to band together.
In 1974, there was mercifully a decrease in black exploitation films and hardcore porno films like Deep Throat. However, there was a dramatic increase in disaster films, which probably kept some of the studios out of deep trouble. Two of the most successful disaster films this year were made by Universal Pictures, Earthquake and Airport 75. I sometimes wonder if artistically and financially Universal Films could have survived without making these kind of films.
There isn't any other way. I think he's right.
To star in Airport 75 and Earthquake, Universal wondered what name actor they could get whose performance wouldn't detract from the other mechanical aspects of these films.
Me? Oh, Al, you're too damn big.
Well, what the hell are you going to do, go shopping for somebody?
Right.
And if you take these elements and mix them all together, you've got this year's blockbuster, Earthquake 75.
The stewardess is flying the plane?
Jim, Stuart Graff.
This is Columbia 409.
This is Al, honey. So much. Religion.
Either dead or badly injured.
Yeah, I think we'll get faster action if you call the ambulance.
It's not working.
We'd like to thank Universal and Chuck Heston for allowing us to have a little fun with their films, and we certainly wish them well in 1975. However, I wonder how Chuck Heston himself would review his work in this type of film.
Well, of course I'll induce vomiting. I know the rules by now.
Towering Inferno may not be doing as well at the box office as some people expected, which may mean this kind of disaster film is perhaps burning itself out. In light of this, I think the trend towards films in 1975 is going to be to get away from those kinds of mechanical movies which are just concerned with the technology of filmmaking, and I think they're going to get around to making movies that are much more personal and more individual in nature. Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which stars Ellen Burstyn, is one such film. It's probably the best motion picture about a woman that I have ever seen. I would like to show you a brief excerpt right now, which speaks for itself.
Do you have a Band-Aid?
Let me see if you got any Band-Aids down there.
I've been looking for a job all day, and these shoes are new. I just got them this morning, and they're giving me a blister. Thank you. I'm a singer.
Sorry, I got no money to pay a singer.
Oh, that's okay. Nobody does.
If I could give you a job, I would do it.
Thank you. You're very kind. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
I don't even have a piano in here.
So...
Come on.
Thank you. See, my husband just died.
I don't even have a piano in here.
I know. So, I have my little boy I have to raise all by myself, and I don't know how I'm gonna do it.
I don't even have a piano in here. You have any experience?
Well, just before I was married.
Are you any good? Look, why don't you come back tomorrow and let me sleep on it tonight?
No, you'll say no tomorrow. If I could just sing for you now.
All right. There's a piano bar down the street. Come on.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Marie, I'll be back in about 20 minutes. Don't burn it down.
To find out if the guy gets the piano, see the movie. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is a very nice way for you and the motion picture industry to start the new year.
At this point, it's probably needless to suggest that much of the news of 1974 was pretty grim. Even the hit motion pictures were disasters. On many days, our balance was restored by reporter Ray Duncan, who seeks out that feature story that reminds us toward the end of an hour of news that no, the world hasn't yet come to an end, and sometimes Ray Duncan's beat turns to entertainment.
Straight up Hollywood Boulevard they danced, and the natives soon figured out it was a stunt to call attention to That's Entertainment, a film rich in classic tap dancing scenes from old Hollywood musicals. They took to the sidewalk for a time, but that is always dangerous in Hollywood. You never really know on the sidewalk who is going to join the act. The announced plan is for the pair to do a marathon tap dance all across the country, dancing on truck beds, planes, or whatever. But there were indications this morning the whole local procession would be turned off as soon as the cameras were. They were stirring up memories, harking back to the old Hollywood, so it only served them right when the old Hollywood showed up. And he did it much better than anything I could do.
After this short break, News Service 75 will continue with 1974 in sports.